here is for the mask or my glasses, because if I wear my mask, I can't wear my glasses because they all fog up. So took my glasses on, put my mask in here. I hope I'm not dressed too casually. I saw Mr. Taquino with his coat and tie. I felt, but I felt this is summertime, right? And also I remember that many of you know Reverend Sudo. I used to work with him in New York many years ago, and I always remember he said that I had a winter personality. So I thought I'll brighten myself up today with this bright shirt bought for me by my beautiful wife a few weeks ago. Let's give her a hand. So this morning, my topic is Hyojeong education. What is it? We've heard a lot about it recently. Mother has been talking a lot about Hyojeong education. I happen to be in education, so it's very much on my mind as well. I want to start by talking about 30 years ago, summer of 30 years ago, 1991, I was in Latvia. Maybe some of you were there. Did any of you go to Latvia for those workshops, Greece? It was an amazing time. As we know, 30 years ago, it was the time of the end of the Cold War, right? And the Berlin Wall had come down just a couple years earlier, and the Soviet Union itself was about to break apart. So that summer was an exciting summer. We had about 18,000 students and teachers, professors that attended our workshops throughout the summer. And near the end of the summer, actually right at the very end of the last workshop that we had that summer, August 20th, that's when there was an attempted coup that took place in the Soviet Union. They arrested Mikhail Gorbachev, put him under house arrest. A military junta tried to take over the country. And I still remember at that time, all the students and professors, they were so worried and scared about what was going to happen, because given their history, they were expecting the worst. And they themselves, because they had attended our workshops, they were probably the most vulnerable. You know, if this coup had succeeded, they would have been among the first that would have been punished and probably imprisoned, many of them, for even just attending our workshops. Fortunately, as we know, 3 days later, the coup failed. Gorbachev was reinstated as the president of the Soviet Union, and within 4 months, the Soviet Union itself no longer existed. So that time in history was truly an amazing transformation of events that took place. In that short period of time, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, the Cold War ended, as Chu Father predicted, as we know. It came about peacefully. So I was part of the contingent that was invited or asked to come and to participate in the so-called Soviet province that time. And so 1 year later, we were starting to have workshops in the Soviet Union itself. We had a series of workshops for educators, together with the Ministry of Education. They invited educators from all 89 districts of Russia to come to the Crimea for a series of conferences in preparation for developing a curriculum that could be used in schools of the former Soviet Union. And it was amazing. Actually, Trinity asked me to give the sermon today, and when she called me, I was in my office at the school. Right at that time, I had come across this book. It says Tetragla Conspectov, which means copybook for notes. This is a book I've been cleaning out my office. I came through all these materials. This is a book, I looked through it, my notes of that I was taking for this, during this time of the workshop. Actually, we had an internal workshop before the workshop in Crimea. And these are my notes from the presenters of that workshop. And I was looking through it, and the first presenter was Dr. Patinas. Dr. Patinas was the scientific editor of my World and I curriculum that we developed there. He is a prominent pedagogue from Latvia, actually, and what? Pedagogue, which means like educator, fancy word for educator. So I was looking through my notes, and he's talking about moral education. He's talking about moral position. That the purpose of moral education is to influence a person's moral position. And then he goes through, there's various theories of moral education, 6 main theories. You know, this is in the Soviet Union, so this is their idea about it. So one of them is based on biology. You know, our genealogy determines our moral position. There's an intellectual theory based upon our reasoning, our thinking, that determines our moral position. He also acknowledges a spiritual factor that we, as when we're born, we do have a certain spiritual aspect, and that also determines our moral position. And then he goes on to say that our various social conditions also influence our moral position, such as, you know, what kind of a group do we belong to, what is the culture around us that influences us, the way that we relate with others personally and with groups also influences our moral position. And finally, our actions. The actions, our habits that we develop day by day also will influence our moral position. So I thought that was interesting, but looking back at this now, you know, and we were developing this character education program, that was the main focus of our work, that could be used in schools throughout Russia and other former Soviet republics. Even though he talked about we have a spiritual aspect, he doesn't mention God. And we know, this is something that's missing, and it's something that is central to Hyojeong education. As I went on this, actually, I went through this further, and I noticed that the second presentation talks about God. So this was given by, maybe you know her, Dr. Donna Ferrantello. So she was there, and she gave a talk on teaching world religions. And she talked about the various world religions and their viewpoints about God, their spiritual teachings and everything. And then one interesting part of it, she talks about the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is one's journey to God. And there's 4 steps in this hero's journey. So the first step is that we have to first initiate and make the decision to go a spiritual path. That we decide we want to take this path, spiritual path, towards God. The second step is we also have to separate from the world around us, not to determine not to be influenced by the ways of the world. Then the third step is then taking this actual path towards God, towards purity, and reaching a state of enlightenment, as we would say in Buddhism. So this third step is really what Hyojeong education is all about. This is our journey towards God. And it's not something that applies simply to children in schools. It's for all of us, right? And every day, we should be engaged in Hyojeong education. So there's a fourth step, which I'm going to leave for now. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But I want to here go on to say that also Dr. Patinas talked about, he built a pyramid, that there's also a certain process to your moral position. So it begins with knowledge, goes on to changing through that knowledge, our behavior changes, and finally it affects our motivation for what we do. And this motivation is what he calls the moral position. I felt this is very similar to, many of you know Father's speech, 3 stages of judgment. In the 3 stages of judgment, he talks about how first we are influenced by hearing God's word, the truth. When we hear the truth, then this begins to have an impact on our personality. It begins to change who we are. But finally, then, it's not just a matter of our personality changing, but finally our heart changing, and connecting ultimately with God's heart. So, the whole purpose of Hyojeong education is connecting us with God. And a central aspect of this is developing our heart of filial piety, right? So filial piety, this is not a phrase that's common in the English language, unless you're in Unification Church. Outside of Unification Church, I don't know if anybody talks about filial piety or not. Should, right, absolutely. Part of the problem is that we're in America, which is a Western country, and filial piety is very much a kind of Eastern concept. It's very much part of Confucianism and other Asian cultures. It's less value here. For us, probably the most important value is freedom, right? We like freedom a lot, and independence. That's how we began. The United States of America started off by rebellion. We rebelled against our mother. Who's our mother? England, the evil England, King George, in the mother position. So our culture started off with this rebellions against authority, very opposite of filial piety. This is ingrained in American culture, American history. So we distrust authority, we want limited government. I'm not going to get into politics. I was told by Person don't talk about politics. However, another aspect of American culture is basis in Christianity. So we know Christianity doesn't say filial piety, but one of the 10 commandments is honor your father and mother, right? So that's very much about filial piety, honoring your parents. So we have this kind of a duality in us, competing, ways of looking at things from the Christian perspective, and then the others like more from the Enlightenment perspective, more secular. This is constantly at war, in us as Americans. So, what filial piety is talking about, developing this aspect, our vertical relationship, starting with our parents and then with God. So, Hyojeong education it's about the first realm of heart. True Father talked about the 4 realms of heart in the family. Children's realm, siblings realm, conjugal realm, and parents' realm of heart. And so Hyojeong education is primarily concerned with the children's realm of heart. So God first conveys His love to us through our parents. Right? These are the first people that we meet in our life. As we come out of our mother's womb, we'll meet our mother and our father, hopefully, for the first time. And through our early years, our primary relationship in our life is with our parents, our mother and father. And this is such an important relationship to develop our heart of filial piety towards them who represent God to us. So part of this love is the children's love is very kind of a responsive love. If the child is not receiving love in the first place, then this puts a block in that child's heart that probably will be a scar upon that person for the rest of their life. So the child's heart begins to open and develop and respond to the parent's love. Also, this is associated with a sense of respect towards one's parents, towards authority in general, a sense of gratitude for receiving love, developing trust, trust of our parents and towards others in general, a sense of devotion. All these different virtues are associated with children's love and are part of Hyojeong education. And this is the way it's meant to be, because as we saw from one of the quotes starting off, Father said that the central aspect of the universe is the parent-child relationship. This is the core axis of the universe, and we are meant to participate in that from the very moment of our birth, through our parents and on to God. So this is why it's a central aspect also of education. Father, in the speech, in that part, it says, if you enter into a mystical state. I always wonder about that word, mystical. What does that mean, enter into a mystical state? Before I came up here, I was sitting there and I was trying to get into a mystical state, praying to get in a mystical state, and not so easy to do. What does that mean, to be in a mystical state? What do you think? Spiritual purity. So I think it means that you transcend your circumstances, you transcend your physical self. You become oblivious to anything around you, and you're in this communion with God in this mystical state. And in that state, we can realize that we are already, it's not just like our knowledge, but we are participating, we are part of this parent-child relationship. When we're in that mystical state, we are relating with God. And in that, we also sort of lose a sense of ourselves. Part of our big problem, is our self-centeredness, self-consciousness. But we lose that, and we are enveloped by God's love when we enter that mystical state. So the end result of Hyojeong, and this is Hyojeong education, the end result of this is that we know who we are. We have no doubt who we are. We are God's children. Amen. No doubt. And we know, we have experienced, and we know God's heart. In the passage from Unification Thought, it talks about to know God's heart, you have to know about God's heart. And we know there it talks about that because of the fall, there are different aspects of God's heart. So God's heart originally was a heart of hope and expectation in preparing the universe and everything for his children to come. There's tremendous hope and expectation, which would have been then, when Adam and Eve were born, transformed into joy. That was God's heart. We know that did not last very long, but that with the fall of man, then that turned to immense sorrow. God's heart was so sorrowful to have lost his children. And I'm really thankful that the band this morning sang the song, Heart of the Father, because that really expresses God's experience at the time of the fall. And God entered this sorrowful state. We have to know that aspect of God's heart. We can't just be joyful and oblivious to that. We have to understand, a heart of filial piety will commiserate with God's heart. God's heart of sorrow and suffering. And then from that point on, a heart of pain and suffering throughout history as God has sought to recover his lost children. And through the principle, through the Bible, as we read about, we can see all the things that God has been through to try to restore us to that original state, and restore his lost connection with us. So, to connect to God's heart means that we have to really be aware of everything that God has been through, and understanding that then to be in a position as a filial son or daughter to want to comfort God's heart and to take upon our shoulders responsibility to do something, to help God. So this is one aspect of our movement that is so different from other churches, other religions. To understand this aspect of God. God is suffering and sorrowful, and God is waiting for us, looking for somebody that God can trust, who can take responsibility to bring his children back to him. So, Hyojeong education is all about this, and it's something that we all need to participate in our daily lives, day by day. I think God has always given us experiences, given us opportunities to grow and develop our hearts and connect with God's heart, but it depends on how we look at things, how we respond to things, how aware are we of what God is saying to us. So it's up to us for that to happen. So, but also, as a school principal, I also think about school too. What does Hyojeong education look like in school? So, what do you think? First of all, do you think I always bang the public school system? Public schools, will you get Hyojeong education in public school? Do you think? Well, maybe it would have been somewhat, a little bit. There used to be prayer in schools and things, but not anymore, right? They actually avoid talking about God very much. So, and we know that today in America, there's a big problem of children disrespecting authority, disrespecting their parents, in accordance with our history. This comes out. Teachers have a hard time. I really empathize with teachers, all teachers. It's not easy to be a teacher. The culture is so much against what teachers are trying to do in the classroom. So I don't just slam public schools. I sympathize with the teachers there. But I do have an opportunity, as a principal of a school and as a private school. New Jersey fortunately gives private schools a lot of freedom to do things. They don't check up on us too often. So we are kind of free to develop our program, our curriculum, the way that we kind of want, as long as we produce good results. So, how many of you attend morning devotion every morning? Okay, a lot of you do. So as you know, Dr. Young talks about developing online holy communities. How many of you have an online holy community? Okay, some. Okay. I'm developing an on-site holy community. On-site, which is New Hope School. Okay. So, what is a holy community? A holy community would be a place where, when people come, when they participate, they feel God's presence, right? You will feel God's presence when you enter that community. This is my goal for New Hope School. And actually, I think I'm in communication with all of our other schools here in America. We have 6 or 7 schools around the United States. There's a new one starting up in Denver, just to let you know. Let's give a hand for Denver. All of our major communities will have a school, and we can teach our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 100th generation, in Hyojeong education. And this is always, when I was in Russia, we used to have model schools conferences every year. But I always had a dream. I wanted to make a model school. So I had that opportunity when I was invited to come to New Hope School. But one thing I found out is that it's not so easy to do that. It's not easy. We have all these big ideas, high ideals, but to put it into practice is not easy to do that. And I wanted to read something from Unification Thought that explains why it's not easy. So it says on page 182, teachers must show God's love through practice. Teachers should give love to the children from the bottom of their hearts, with a parental heart. Then children will be moved by this and will come to respect and love their teachers, and will become willing to follow their teachers from the bottom of their hearts. While giving love to the children in this way, teachers should lead them to the practice of a life of love, helping them realize how much joy they can obtain from living for the sake of God and other people. Can you see why it's not easy? It really requires a lot of teachers. And we know that we are not perfect yet. And we have fallen nature. And it's not easy to show God's love all the time. As Dr. Hyojeong says, all the time. It's not easy to do that. Things come up in our daily lives, and it's easy to separate, to disconnect from God. And we are surrounded by a fallen culture. And as I said, students today, a lot of children are not very respectful. They challenge you, they push your buttons. So to keep that position is really a challenge. To show God's love and to teach with God's love all the time. And so, however, I have a dream. I believe it's possible and that it will happen one day. So one of the things that Dr. Hyojeong talks about, if I have a holy community, you need a Trinity, right? So in your holy communities, you have a Trinity. You have a Trinity because you're not working on your own. You have to work in collaboration with others. So Trinity means how many? 3, okay? So I've been thinking about, who is my Trinity? I need a Trinity, right? New Hope School. So they may not know it, but 2 of them are here right now. So Josephine's part of my Trinity, and Jan is part of my Trinity, and I don't know if Jocelyn's here or not, but she is also part of our Trinity. We have 3 teachers, well, Josephine's in the office, but 3 of our members who are in our school. And it's interesting, all of them start with J. I thought it was very significant. Josephine, Jan, Jocelyn. They all start with J. That means something. I don't know what, but it does mean something. But we also have another Trinity in our school. We have young teachers who are not members yet, but I see them also as our Trinity as well. And it's interesting, they have different first names. They don't start with J. But they're very different. So one is Hispanic, one is black, one is white. Okay, I'm still waiting for an Asian, but that would be 4, not 3. But anyway, we have 3 young women teachers that also I look at as this is also a Trinity, a secondary Trinity that we have. So for this to work, we have to really come together, work together, collaborate with each other, and we have a common vision for what we're trying to do at New Hope School. So, but to have a filial heart means that you have to have an experience of receiving God's love, right? So this is something I feel like, this is my wife's position. We are there we have to show God's love, to our Trinities. And with that, then they can also be inspired and out of a common desire to make this work, we can then reach out to our students, their families, parents, and embrace them also with God's love. So I just want to conclude, actually not to conclude yet, but the word Hyojeong means one mind. One mind. It means that you don't have any other thought except your devotion to God. Nothing else comes in. And I think all of us struggle. We know, again, we are, even if you're a very devoted member and you attend morning devotion, you do all the things, you pray, you fast, and everything, we still have thoughts that come in that try to distract us. And even preparing the sermon today, I was struggling with that, So it's not easy to do that, but that's the goal, to be of one mind, our thoughts are totally one with God's thoughts. So this brings me to the last stage of the hero's journey. The ultimate goal is not to become one with God. The ultimate goal then, as Donna talked about, is to what? To then, once you fulfill this and reach that, then to go back out to the community and share that with everyone else. Okay, you don't just disappear into a convent or a monastery and commune with God. You have to go out to the world and share this with others. And so this is what our teachers are called to do. They're there, it's a mission to share what we have experienced, what we have received, and give that to others. So the last thing I want to do is actually, over these past several months, my wife and I, are very moved by morning devotion every day. And I know most of you attend. It's really influenced my life because, we receive God's word, but in such a way that it's really alive. And you think about what does this mean in my life? How does this mean for today? What should I do today after what I've heard? You apply it in your life. This is what it should be like, right? And this develops a sort of a living relationship with God. So I just wanted to share with you, I'm just going to read. I was looking through, I have a little book here, all my notes from the last several months. And I went through and I picked out certain things that Dr. Young shared. I'm not sure if it's exactly word for word or my interpretation sometimes, but things that really made an impression on me. And I just want to read them. I'm not going to make any comments about it. Just read them, and then you think about what kind of meaning does that have for you. So, reflect, at the end of the day, reflect on each day, pray for the next day's activities. Opportunities will come to those who prepare. Reflect on how God has guided you throughout your life. Don't live a habitual life. Always be open to God's voice. Think how much God loves the people that you meet. What is God's hope and will for them? If we realize how much God loves us, we will never go the wrong way. We should feel more sorrow for God's suffering than our own. is not a matter of right or wrong, but a matter of heart and love. We should become people that others can believe in and follow. Treat every moment of your life as holy. We can't understand people unless we understand their past. There's always a reason why something happens. The joy of giving is greater than the joy of receiving. And the last one, I like this the most. That the best retirement plan, live for the sake of others throughout your life. Thank you.